Today, I'd like to take you on a succinct kind of journey of exploration into what the title says here, some intercultural strategies that I observed during the Rugby World Cup. So just to give you an outline of what I'll be talking about, first of all, I'll give you a quick introduction of how this all came about through who I am, delve into the big picture of what it's all about. And then the main focus will be on how I observed high performance meeting, one of the frameworks that I work a lot with, and that of cultural intelligence. And then finish up hopefully with just a few words on what the future holds through what I've been able to observe so far. So first of all, who am I? A brief introduction was given and given quite well, but just to explain, I'm a bit of a mixed bag. I was born in England and we moved to New Zealand when I was 5 years old. So most of my education was completed in New Zealand. Back in the 80s, Japanese was a very popular subject to take at high school, and I became part of that group that studied Japanese, and that led to me coming to Japan first in 1986 as an exchange student, majoring in Japanese language, and then working in Japanese for a number of years, finally in what I call my home now, academia. But it didn't all start in academia. I first was part of the tourist industry, which was booming in the early 1990s in New Zealand. So my first job was as a tour guide. I then went on to become a tour planner, tour operator, which led to the next step in my career, that of an interpreter and translator, when I moved back to Japan in 1985. I've been in Japan ever since, and one thing led to another. And to give us enough time to get into the main part of this presentation, I'm now a professor at Nanzan University, which is situated in Nagoya in central Japan. My main fields are multicultural studies, intercultural workplace communication, etc. So this is kind of the backdrop to what got me into the Rugby World Cup. And the big picture basically is, as I've just explained, being from New Zealand, one would expect this talk to be mostly centered on the All Blacks. Now, if anyone's not too familiar with rugby, to New Zealanders, and I'm pretty sure that it's the same in Australia as well, but more so in New Zealand, it's gone beyond a sport. It's more like a religion. And these guys that you see on the screen here are treated somewhat like gods. They have godlike status. However, my journey began through the observations of this team, Scotland. The reason that came about was I was due for a sabbatical and managed to create a worthy research project that the university accepted. And through the cooperation with the Rugby World Cup Organising Committee, I was able to actually work as a Team Liaison Officer for Scotland. And in return, I was allowed to not only observe their intercultural journey throughout the World Cup, but also it allowed me to have access to other teams for my research. You may ask what a liaison officer is. Frankly, spending 40 days with the Scottish team, it first meant 6 weeks of very little sleep, 24/7 job, looking after all of the needs of the team, which included anything from logistics coordination, our movements throughout the country. If any of you are familiar with the World Cup, it was made up of 12 different venues, and each of the matches that the competing teams participated in or competed in were held at different places throughout the tournament. So logistics was a big point, making sure they got from A to B. It also meant daily schedule management, which could be anything from coordinating their regular trainings throughout the week leading up to game day, to any community engagement activities or commitments that each of the teams had as part of their terms of participation, and general support in all areas. I was blessed to have a team of 5 including myself, an assistant liaison, a team interpreter, and 2 security advisors. Bar the security advisor jobs, because I'm not a qualified security advisor by any means of the imagination, but the interpreter and the liaison officers would often switch roles as we were all bilingual. So that gives you an idea of what it was about, and this allowed me full access to observation. And so from there, we get into the crux of what I want to talk about. For me, this is where high performance met cultural intelligence. And what I mean by that is, with the advancement of, this buzzword globalization, but also multiculturalism in international sport, especially in rugby nowadays, there's been an increased call for the members of each team to be equipped with not only a sense of high performance and a shared definition, but also the ability to adapt in many different intercultural situations when they are touring. For the word high performance, I think this illustration here best summarizes what that involves. But basically, it's about making it work. Everything leading up to game day for any of the international teams, whatever sport it may be, is a combination of all of these things, whether it be high performance leadership, whether it be a recognition of the environment they're in, and the acceptance and also the functionality within diversity and inclusion throughout the entire time that they are involved in any international campaigns. So basically, the players, the coaches, and all of the support staff, including management, work together to produce the best performance possible. What does that mean in terms of cultural intelligence? If any of you are familiar with this framework, it is, again, a different way of perhaps describing the intercultural understanding and intercultural communication frameworks that have existed for a long time. But it's a very workable model in terms of how it complements high performance. And what I mean by that is it's made up of 4 main areas. As you can see here, CQ, or cultural intelligence, starts with some kind of drive. So your level of interest, your motivation when you're thrown into a multicultural interaction. To navigate your way through that, you need some kind of knowledge, your understanding of how similar or how different the environment you have been placed in is to what you're normally functioning in. That allows you to produce a number of strategies to cope with any differences, to help you plan, to be more aware of what's required of you to function effectively. And then that obviously leads to the action. Now, this isn't just a one-time experience. It's something it's a continuous cycle that we are always involved in. So for the international teams, coming from a high-performance environment where there was a lot of expectation on them to perform, they were then thrown into this foreign environment. So here I'd like to delve in what actually happened and what I observed throughout my research. So first of all, let's take a look at the study itself. It was a qualitative research in nature, meaning that the instruments, the collection tools I used, were really trying to, explore the life stories of the participants that I was observing, I was interacting with as a team liaison officer. It started with a survey asking them some very simple open-ended questions of their background, their experiences, and their thoughts on how their intercultural sensitivity, their awareness, helped them throughout this high-performance experience of the World Cup. I had time not only to interview the team I was looking after, but also to interview a number of other teams as well. And it was non-participant observation from my case, as I'm not a rugby player or a professional rugby player. My rugby playing days ended a long time ago at high school, and I won't mention how far back that goes. But it allowed me to really watch and observe how they utilized their own high-performance consciousness when they were exposed to the culture of Japan and what that entailed, including the interactions with staff, local volunteers, or even on their days off when they were out and about mingling with the local community. In total, I managed to survey, interview, and observe 72 players, coaches, management, and support staff in total, which gave me a broad enough view into the types of experiences and the thoughts that they had. In total, I looked at 4 competing nations, and as I just mentioned, these were types of participants that I was able to get to participate into the research. So, what did I find out? In short, it was a 3-stage cycle that I was able to draw from the data collected. That 3-stage cycle for the players, the coaches, and the management support crew focused on, first, the framework of intercultural sensitivity, which then led to intercultural adaptability. And finally, and what was very important for all of the teams that I observed, was intercultural efficacy. So what do these mean, and what did I actually find out? Well, first of all, let's look at intercultural sensitivity. Here, I'd like to show you some of the extracts from the data that I collected. Here, first, you can see one of the players commenting on what he thought about sensitivity in terms of the intercultural experiences he was having. And here, as you can see, he focuses on that ability to, or that sensitivity to expect the unexpected culturally. And that they had a focus, their job at hand was to perform, but to perform their best in a foreign environment. And what was interesting here was that he mentioned the fact that they already had a diverse mix of players. And for those not familiar with rugby, when you look at the top tier playing nations around the world now, they are a mixture of many different nationalities. For example, Scotland, the team I was looking after, in its team on the field or the non-playing members at any one time, there were 3 South African players, 3 Australian, and 3 New Zealand, who had naturalized in Scotland to make them eligible for the national squad. So it was a day-to-day experience for them already. And so this actually helped them, as you see here, embrace cultural differences on a day-to-day basis. So they already came with that sensitivity. Also, they are naturally looked after well whenever they go to a foreign playing nation. And this, for them, many of them actually commented on how, and I'll go back to that screen, sorry about that, that remembering things will be different because they were experiencing that on a day-to-day basis and learning how important it was to learn that there will be differences before they arrive. To summarize that first stage of the cycle, one of the coaches said that being thoughtful towards these differences even before traveling was key. And so before they arrived, they had the opportunity to work on the cultural sensitivity as a team. Management and support crew were also a major part of this high-performance environment. And as you can see here, suggestions that knowing things are going to be different assisted them in their preparation and especially getting them prepared mentally for what was about to come. So we can see from these comments that intercultural sensitivity often came with a high level of consciousness. And it also was a fundamental mindset placed within the team environment before actually arriving. And finally, that allowed them to create some shared values in terms of expecting the unexpected before they arrived. Now, in terms of the intercultural adaptability, the second part of the cycle, being sensitive, of course, is important, but being able to adapt is equally important as well. One of the players commented here that their job was to win the World Cup, that they needed to perform at their best. And for them, that meant being in a comfortable and familiar environment. So there was a time to adapt, but there was a time to feel comfortable. And then in order to be able to do that, it was vital for them to have people in their support crew to act as a bridge to the Japanese culture. Now, as I explained before in my introduction, my job as a team liaison was to do just that. So it was that link between their normal high-performance culture that they were immersed in day out, and the times when they ventured out into the local culture, and there they had the ability to adapt, but could come back to a normality afterwards. Another comment was that whether it be a World Cup or another international tour, the degree to which they adapt with, and this was mentioned by one of the coaches, very much depends on the situation they are in and the role that they play within the team. So again, they pointed to the importance of having somewhat of a bridge between themselves and the local culture, so that they had people within the team to act as their voice, especially when they were focusing on getting ready for game day. So again, a balance here. A couple of other comments to show that were representative of some of the data obtained. And here, a very important one mentioned by one of the coaches is that the high performance nature of the environment to them was one type of culture. And it was something they were continuously adapting to. So within their key team members, they had the people to guide them through each part of that culture, including the local culture they're experiencing, in this case, in the Japanese hosted Rugby World Cup. Our job there was to follow up with some easy-to-follow guidelines to give them some basic tips. So once they were out of that high-pressure environment, they had some key guidelines by which they were able to relax and experience some of the local culture. And one of the team managers expressed that the World Cup is all about knowing who needs to adapt to the differences and how it has a positive effect and outcome for the team. So here again, the key of this CQ knowledge, culturally intelligent knowledge being provided to them, played a huge role in reducing unnecessary stress to allow them to remain focused. Now, in terms of the last part of the cycle, before I go to that, let me just summarize the observations here on adaptability. For adaptability, it was a team-wide willingness, and that can be reflected back into the framework of culturally intelligent motivation, that willingness to learn when to adapt. But also what was equally important for them to perform was to know when to switch on and off to the local culture. And naturally, that was a shared high level of consciousness throughout the team, for which they constantly went to their cultural link pins, the support crew, the liaisons, to know when they should behave in what way and when they were able to switch off so that they could focus on the job at hand. And that led to the inquiry into how effectively they used their intercultural awareness, their sensitivity, their adaptability, and what I've labeled here as intercultural efficacy. The player here said outside of training, performing on the field, once he was out and about enjoying the local culture, he would always try to act appropriately and effectively. And this came through his high performance experience, that once he was in the team, he was expected to behave a certain way, and he could easily transfer that willingness to help him enjoy the local culture in his downtime. And an interesting note at the bottom here you see is that he found this a better way, seeking advice so that he could effectively behave and enjoy the culture without making quick judgments or being biased. So openly accept the differences that he was experiencing in the local Japanese culture. Another player said that learning to be effective is something like joining the national squad for the first time. It's all about learning structures. It's about making a plan and immersing oneself in that structure. This is very much a complement of what we look at in cultural intelligence, that ability to create strategies and then actually use them. So he was actually expressing the framework of cultural intelligence from his own viewpoint of high performance culture. So as you can see, it was very easy for team liaisons to equip them with the type of advice that would really maximize the enjoyment and the functionality of what they were experiencing throughout the World Cup. In terms of coaches and management, one of the coaches expressed this, that one of their mantras for the team is to recognize and accept difference. And this starts even before they come to a World Cup or go on tour internationally. It's done within the team environment, and it gives them the mindset to get motivated as to why things are different. And there, once they have that knowledge, they're able to minimize the stress that it might create without having that knowledge. So being better prepared and being able to find ways to behave, to communicate, so that their interaction outside of their normal environment is as smooth as possible was a key fundamental point for the whole team. One of the management and support crew mentioned also that it is a challenging environment, the high performance environment. And added to that is the challenges of a foreign culture and language. So they recognize how easy it is for players to become stressed. And again, they point to having the key people in the team to help them bridge that. So as you can see, it's all about a structure, a framework. And the teams, without being overly theoretical or pulling out, very complicated structures, they were actually able to verbalize quite well some of the similarities between what they held true in a high performance framework to what, for us in intercultural communication, understanding, and cultural intelligence studies, hold equally as important when we are trying to explore the experiences of people exposed to foreign cultures and environments. So to summarize the efficacy part of this cycle, first of all, we can say that the teams really focused on the creation of clear boundaries, learning when to go to the key members in their teams for advice, and also the effect, or as I've just mentioned, that effective use of cultural link pins. They didn't drag us out at all with them on their days off. They wanted to go out and explore and experience the local culture as part of their downtime. So they often came to us for that advice or to talk us through what they were thinking of doing and what language or cultural tips we could give them. So here you can see they're trying to build that strategy and turn it into a perceived action that they can use in an effective way to enjoy the moment. And finally, I think it's important to mention that this really is an introduction of the cultural intelligence cycle. It's framed as high performance, where they're expected to do a job and they're expected to have their best team prepared for the game, and that they want that normal environment before heading onto the field. But as equally important, they recognize that they were in a foreign environment. And for that, this required the motivation, the knowledge, the strategy, and the action plan to make it the best possible so that they could then come back to the high-performance environment in a relaxed state. So these are some of the observations that I was able to make throughout my time involved in the World Cup. By way of conclusion, what I can say is that while the aim was to assess and analyze the patterns of cultural intelligence in this one example of a high-performance sports context, the noteworthy findings with this transferability of what I can say is a high-performance mindset to what is very much so an intercultural, new foreign environment for many of the players, coaches, and the management support crew that I interacted with. In order for us to aid that transition, as I mentioned before, the introduction of link pins, and this word has been used a lot in many of the intercultural studies done up until to date, and that is the link pins that can offer that communication and that cultural bridge to make the situation run as smoothly as possible. For me, the blend of high performance with cultural intelligence just seems to perfectly fit. And for me, that is very much a very motivating finding that I will use for the future implications of this research. So in terms of the future implications, the standout points for me, it's this ability to be sensitive, a willingness to adapt, and the motivation to effectively function. So in terms of the future, what does that hold? The future implications are, where I am based in Japan, the top league from next year will experience some new developments. That being the creation of a 3-tier professional league, which goes away from the corporate hybrid league that Japanese rugby has experienced thus far. It starts in January 2022. And through this, there is an expected increase of professional players, not just from within Japan, but from throughout the other international playing nations. And luckily for me, this experience has led to a connection with my local professional team, the Toyota corporate-sponsored Verblitz rugby team. From this summer, I will be working with them to do some intercultural communication and coaching and consulting. And what that will entail is some Japanese foreign player communication coaching. Also, the Japanese and foreign coach dynamic communication coaching. And more importantly, where the money comes from, the corporates, getting the corporate staff and the foreign coaching staff on the same page to create an interculturally bound high-performance environment. So there you have it in a nutshell. I've gone on a little bit too long, but hopefully I've left enough time for some questions. So I will now hand it over to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. There's a lot to talk about with intercultural communication and putting it together with high performance sport, particularly rugby, and your example of the Scottish team was really quite fascinating. There's already a question in the chat room, but I've got some other ones I'd like to ask you first, just a couple to begin the questions. And so I was thinking, you mentioned a link pin, so I would gather you must have been in many ways, one of those link pins that players would go to. And I was thinking, about what kinds of things would they come to you about? What kinds of issues did they want to talk to you about?
Sure. Yeah. Where do I start? It was your general day-to-day tips on how to order a coffee. It could be anything as simple as that, where the best places to go, what kind of foods they should, risk to try. They would come to you for those things. They would often sit down in the team room and ask about the Japanese culture. We had some community engagement activities where we went to local schools. So they were very much interested in learning about the education system. So it was very sort of day-to-day stuff where they would often ask about life in general because they wanted to make the most of the experience. And this was a shared, I guess, pattern amongst the other remaining 3 teams that I was able to research. In terms of problematic areas, practice days were often an area where we would go out to city-sponsored practice arenas, and just the Japanese stigma for not being able to think outside the box when something didn't go as planned, and the frustration it caused the teams at that time. For example, we had 250 kilograms of ice delivered each day to the practice venue. We needed it by a certain time, and if the delivery was late, the Japanese would say, well, we have to wait. My job was then to make sure that everything on the team side ran to schedule. So I had to retrain the Japanese side to say, where's your plan B? Where's your plan C? And then cushion that blow with the team so that they weren't frustrated, because my job was to take all of the worry out of that. So I then had to explain to the support crew that I was handling the problem, but that they had to understand that Japanese weren't very good at thinking outside the box in these situations. So here I was taking punches from both sides. But to them, they appreciated that because, as I mentioned in some of the extracts from the data, that they appreciated that stress being minimized and the problems being solved. Yeah.
Yeah. And were the players staying in hotels or were they billeted?
They were staying in hotels. So each of the venues that they were playing at, they would be staying in that hotel anywhere between 2 to 3 days before the game, sometimes longer if they wanted to base themselves in one place for a long time in between matches. We had a dedicated team room. We had 2 or 3 floors shut off to the public that were team-only rooms. But in their downtime, they would then venture out and experience the local communities, the local cultures, and go out for team meals by themselves on their days off.
Okay. So we have a question from Ray Ramos in the Philippines. I think you can see it in the chat room there.
Okay, yes, I can send you. I've written a paper within my own sort of university journal on this topic. So if anyone is interested in reading it, if you put your email address as Ray has there, I can send you the paper, and that outlines the framework in detail. Yep, no problems.
Okay. And for all of those who are online at the moment listening to this, please do see that you can put your questions in the chat room there, so that Sean can answer. Now, I've got another question. I've got a range of questions, in fact, but one of them is digging into this intercultural communication a bit further.
Sure.
These are young guys who are high-performance athletes, and they have priorities. You know, in a way, they're there to do that particular thing, so very focused. So I'm interested in whether you find in these moments of, coming to a place like Japan, where it's not always very easy to read the wind, as it were. In your conversations with these athletes, do they, for example, they bring baggage with themselves, so we've got issues around, religious background, questions of sexuality, gender, race, all that kind of stuff. And I'm just wondering, in this, incredible, place of communication between, really such different worlds, do you find, in your research, do you find that there are these other kinds of complexities that are emerging? When you bring up the word sensitivity, I'm thinking, well, how sensitized, in your job, you have to be, it's like, how do you get to really, have that full kind of involvement, I suppose, with another person's worldview in that situation? Sure.
Yeah. For the teams that I was able to observe, and these were two teams from each of the, from the Southern Hemisphere, two from the Southern Hemisphere, two from the Northern, top tier teams. So for them, they worked extremely hard on the issue of diversity and inclusion, because it's been such a key point within high performance in recent years, that the younger guys coming through were quite open and, I guess, adaptive to what that meant. Some of the more senior players accepted it. Were they sensitive? Probably not. So it was more of an age-related issue in terms of, I found that the younger players in the team were more accepting and more open to difference in its entire meaning. The older players bit their tongue, learned to accept it. And so in that regard, it was instilled into them from an early stage that this is what they had to do, and it was an integral part of high performance. From conversations from the other liaison officers throughout the 20 teams competing, some of the lower tier nations, from European countries, from the South Pacific, etc., there were other challenges. There were religious challenges, there were dietary challenges. And in those situations, it was about creating a normality for the team rather than learning how to cope with differences. So that, again, is another future possible topic to research. Hopefully my, counterparts have kept their notes from 2 years ago. But certainly, depending on how rigid the culture is they've come from, really determined how accepting they were of difference and how they were able to adapt or to be sensitive or to be effective. So it was interesting, in that regard, hearing from other liaison officers.
Do you think there was a level of cultural literacy, maturity that happened over that period?
Oh, for sure, because they weren't just navigating their own diverse cultures within the teams, but they were then banding together to experience the Japanese culture as a team. So there was a cultural maturity happening where it allowed them as one team to share their experiences of, in a common way. They could all come back to the team room and talk about what they experienced about the Japanese culture. And it gave them that third culture. They created their own culture there where they could then view what they were experiencing while they were in Japan. So, yeah, there was a huge cultural maturity in that regard throughout the tournament.
Have they kept in touch afterwards?
Yes, they have. There are a few players that after the World Cup retired from international duties and, well, for example, Greg Laidlaw, one of the predominant players in the Scottish team, he's now in Japan. I'm in regular contact with him. Due to COVID, I've yet to catch up with Coffee because of COVID restrictions placed on teams. People like Kieran Reid, the ex-All Black captain, was playing for Toyota. Michael Hooper was here, the current Australian captain. So I've managed to talk with these people as well and keep in contact with those that experienced the World Cup. Coaches as well. The wonder of modern technology, social media, and having Messenger at your fingertips and Zoom now means that as long as I keep the time difference in mind, I can connect with these people because the great thing about it is they're just normal human beings. They've been placed in a high-performance environment and they're willing to share that for the good of the development of future high-performance teams. So sharing their experiences, sharing their stories has been a wonderful thing to be able to have access to post the World Cup as well.
And remind me, is this the World Cup in which there was a typhoon and the Scottish team couldn't play?
Yes. Yes, a lot of teams didn't play, and the team I was looking after, Scotland, forced World Rugby's hand in a good way to allow to make it possible for the last round robin match, Japan versus Scotland, to take place. And this was through some amazing work on the Japanese side the night before the typhoon and during the typhoon to make sure that the stadium, everything and anything was tied down, secured. They had staff there for 24 hours draining the field to make sure that that match could take place to decide who went through to the quarterfinals. Unfortunately, Scotland lost, but for the good of Japanese rugby, and what a team it was, Japan came through and they won that game in front of close to a full house, which says a lot for the Japanese people as well, that during that typhoon, once it had subsided, they were willing to find any way possible to get to the stadium to support their team. So it was a wonderful experience, yeah.
Oh, great. Look, we're about to finish this session, and thank you so much, Sean, for your time. Just very quickly, any lessons for the Olympics?
Well, we'll put the COVID mess to one side, but lessons for the Olympics, I guess having the cultural link pins in place to allow true intercultural interaction to take place is key. And that you put your own cultural framework aside and find that way to link what is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many people, to allow the sports teams over here to, in some way, and I don't know how this will become possible, but to some way allow them to be exposed to the Japanese culture, to take that away with them so that they can perhaps, become somewhat of a thought-provoking experience for future international sporting travel.
Well, thank you very much for that journey into the Rugby World Cup and the Scottish team going to Japan and guiding us through some of the intercultural complexity that comes with communication.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. All the best.